Whoever drinks beer, he is quick to sleep. Whoever sleeps long does not sin. Whoever does not sin enters heaven. Thus, let us drink beer.
Welcome back to the Go to Hell podcast. Strong opinions, weekly held about Christianity, pop culture, and beer. Now let's join our hosts, Tim Curley and Colton Pierce, for part 2 of Divorce, Brokenness, and Grace.
A lot of the early challenges that you faced as far as how you were going to come into this marriage, what it is that you needed to do. Now I kind of want to shift our focus a little bit towards the church. Again, still talking about the early parts, and maybe you didn't feel it right away, but you have to feel it at some point. And this question kind of has 3 parts. So first off, did you feel accepted by the church right away? So you are, so you moved back to, you moved to Tulare as part of the marriage. So you moved here.
Yeah.
You got incorporated in a church that she was already established in.
Established,
or
but not
working her way in.
She was going to the church, but she wasn't. Well, we had what, maybe 400 people show up on a Sunday, but it was if you were established, you saw 50, 75 people on a. She was established, but not known within circles.
Yeah, in that church in particular.
Danica, come here. We're gonna throw Danica on real quick. When you were at First Baptist before, or as we met, you were just like you were part of a women's group.
My friend invited me to go to like an event that was for like couples, I think. Like when they used to do the comedian nights.
Okay. Oh yeah, the talent show thing.
Oh, did you see Greg and Lisa do what's the famous Greg and Lisa one? They did a SNL. Oh, the cheerleaders.
Oh yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
But my friend she wasn't even able to go, but I went anyway.
So when you and I met, how many people knew you were divorced? Is what Colton's getting at. Probably not that many.
They didn't really know, but I felt like everybody knew.
Oh, there you go.
That's part of it.
Okay.
That's part
I
of it.
felt a lot of shame walking in.
Danica felt a lot of shame. I already established I'm emotionally intuitive. I am socially not intuitive because I just don't give a funk. So I didn't feel it. But I walked in that church like I owned it.
Well, and actually,
did I not? I mean, I was like, I'm going to sign up for this. I'm going to sign up for that.
You're not allowed to go. Actually, I have another, because I don't know, since Tim has already acknowledged that he's not socially intuitive. But I want to ask socially intuitive questions. So, was there any moment that you two felt like people didn't accept your marriage? So you were talking about how you felt like there was some shame there. Did you feel like there was any part that the church felt on your guys' end where there was, this is a marriage, the third marriage in particular?
No, I never felt
third marriage. I never felt it, but somebody made a comment about how could I be allowed to be on some kind of
on the board.
I was divorced.
She was on the board. She was on the church.
Well, okay,
board
I guess that's
was.
probably more of what I was trying to talk about there, where I'm like, did you feel like there was ever at any point where it was like people questioned your guys' relationship again because of the fact that it's your third marriage?
It was all my own shame. Everybody was welcoming to me.
It
was my own shame.
The only response we ever got that we were aware of was always surprise, like, oh, like they just assumed Jeff was our kid, and they assumed if they knew Christina was like, that's their kid. Like they'd always been it was just assumed we'd always been married. And it was never like, oh, okay, yeah, no. The only instance was, but even that one's fantastic to what you're going to. Yeah, she got asked onto the board before I did. If you're listening to this board, basically like for our church, it's like the elders, which it wasn't nearly as highfalutin, but she got asked on the board before I did, and somebody questioned her being divorced on there. I got asked to be on there, which then got her booted because, understandably, you can't have a couple on the
Yeah, you
board,
can't
and
have
then no one gave a damn that I had married a divorced or whatever. So
They didn't care. Plus, I was like, "What are you doing on board?" I didn't understand it. Tim was like, "I know what to do."
she was already over it already.
Well,
I'm tired of these 3-hour meetings solving nothing.
Well, and I think also this leads to another question where do you feel that you had to, you were talking about some of the shame that you felt. Do you feel like either of you had to face insecurities that you had for yourself when it went to going to church, as far as you had to acknowledge the fact that you were like, okay, I'm marrying into, this is the third marriage for her. And for you also being a part of where it's like, I have to go through this again, where it's like I'm married, and again, there's a lot of shame that kind of comes with that, which I don't discredit you for having. And I don't think that the church helps with that. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that that's also been part of the hard part where it's, and I'm not equating it to that, but again, it's that whole idea of the sinner in church that's just sitting there and they're sweating. And the pastoral staff or maybe everybody else is not even thinking about it, but it's something that you yourself are dealing with on where you are thinking about what it is that according to the scriptures or what you've been taught for such a long time is improper or immoral. And so you have to sit there in church. How was that for both of you, going to church where it was like, okay, this is something, and this is more public, right? Like, because this is kind of what I was getting at before, where it's like, okay, 90% of the church population can watch porn, but nobody ever says it out loud, right? But this is a public declaration of like, hey, I've been split from somebody, or I'm marrying somebody who has been split from someone else. And so it's like, that's something that you have to sit there and you're like, people know this. And so you're sitting there, and are there any insecurities that you guys felt like you had to work through?
So I felt it, but there were enough comments, like let's say in Bible study or other groups, that I strongly felt like nobody was talking to me face to face, but it was discussed in other ways. And eventually, once people got to know me, they knew that. So my oldest son didn't really go to church, but they knew that I had an older son. My daughter had one last name. My youngest son had a different last name. And then now I'm married and I have a different last name.
Right.
So of course they know whether they ask or not, and people talk. That's what I felt.
Yeah.
Nobody, except for that one that we heard about, didn't want me on the board, but people didn't pay attention to that. But I just felt, because of comments that were made negatively about people being divorced and stuff, that probably once they knew my history, they were talking about it, and of course nobody came to me, so it was like, had to be behind my back.
Well, and I think also, particularly in this church before Tim takes away, because I think that, and maybe this is something that you can talk about a little bit, where, and this is an observation that I think we've talked about on the show, or maybe
I know
we
what
talked
you're going to
about.
say. You mentioned it, and when you said it, I told her after either I brought it up to her, what you'd said, and because I found it so fascinating. So go ahead.
Yeah, my mom had brought it up that at the church that we were attending before, there were actually quite a few divorces that had existed within the church, but the males dominated or got to keep the church, was kind of like the concept, where it was there were several men who were a part of relationships, one where they had both of the daughters from they had two daughters who were the exact same age, one from the cheating scandal that he had, and I was the same age as both of those girls. They were borderline twins, because dad, yes, different moms. So I was like, if you want to stop recording, I can tell you who it is. I was like, if you don't know who it is, I was like,
we'll be back for a quick break.
Elevate your space with Jollywood Live Edge custom furniture and discover the art of craftsmanship. At Jollywood, we transform your vision into reality with our exquisite custom furniture and woodworking. We source only the finest woods and materials, ensuring durability and elegance in every creation. Our commitment to the highest quality and exceptional service ensures that every piece we create is not just furniture, but a masterpiece. Experience the perfect harmony of beauty and functionality designed just for you. Call us at 559-553-2010 or visit us on Instagram at Jollywood Official to start your journey today. Jollywood Live, Edge Custom Furniture. Crafting quality, creating legacy.
Final beer. All right, final beer. We're still going. A little discussion off the air.
So again, we're gonna get into our next beer for a little bit, but the church that we were in was male dominated as far as when it comes to the divorce. The male got to keep the church, and get to parade his new wife around the church kind of stuff. And it was just kind of sad because I knew people that had relationships with the females that they were previously in a relationship with, and they liked them, and that was good. But they have to hang their head up in shame, and there was a lot of negative feelings towards them because they had to leave and all this kind of stuff. But meanwhile, oftentimes with the men, they were equally a part of the issues that were happening, and so, but yet the girls were the ones, or the females were the ones that had to leave. So, and so I think it's okay to sit there and say that there were insecurities that you might have been facing, especially in the church that we were in at that particular time. You weren't invisible. There was no, even though we said that it was like a church of 400, people knew people. Like it was a large. Oh,
it was a church of 400, but it was a church of about 125. That was a core. That was very knowledgeable, and let's see. When I moved here, I think the town had a population of, I want to say like 55, maybe 50. Like we exploded. We've added 25,000 people since I've been here. At least at that church. I know, not being at that church, I'm not really connected to Larry at all because I don't do business here. I do business overseas. I'm not in the ag business, so I don't do business in town. I'm not connected at all to Larry. I have to rely on people who are. But at that church, even though I wasn't, there were muckety mucks in town that were top people in business in variety of sectors of business in town that were, so it was a who's of people at that church, for sure. Yeah, I never felt any of that. Now, part of that is I think that's three reasons. One, yeah, I do think there's a bit of a chauvinism there for sure within the church. Two, and I don't know that that's that church. I think it's a lot of churches.
Oh yeah.
I also think Danica talked about the shame she felt that she was projecting onto herself. I think women are much more reflective, even when they're not the one who's at fault. I think they tend to be, if I had to guess, much more self-reflective on it and feel that guilt, whether it's even when it's justified. I think they just feel it, where men are just like, nope, moving on to the next conquest, motherfucker. And so they don't give a damn. So I think there's that. Two, like I said, yes, I joke. Yes, I can be very socially. I don't give a damn when I want to be. I particularly don't care when someone's throwing shade at me. I don't. If I don't respect you and I have a relationship with you, I could give two shits if you got something to say about me, or so. And I tend to just tune it out. So if anything was being said, I wasn't aware of it. And then three, I will say, my wife and I were leading a financial class towards the end of us being at the church. And in that class, there were some older ladies in there It was Dave Ramsey's course. Some older ladies in there. I think they were wanting to do some refreshers because they were coming up on retirement, so they didn't necessarily work on the budgeting, but more like what they needed to do going into retirement. Well, they needed budgeting going into retirement since they're moving into a fixed income situation. But we had in there a woman who kept showing up like late, like not 2 minutes late, like 10, 15 minutes late. Like we've already done our introductions, the video started, and they're given given looks and faces when this woman's coming in, like the whirling dervish, like just like hair on fire, like I'm sorry I'm late, blah blah blah, like disrupting the class, sitting down. And so we knew what the woman's situation was. So after the class, we pulled her aside, and Anika said, you need to give her a break.
Yeah.
This woman, and I think she'd shared it already, so it wasn't like we were revealing information. We were reiterating to what these women should have already internalized, one as human beings, but certainly as Jesus followers. Look, her husband's just left her after like 20 years. He didn't allow her to work while they were married. He's left her not only with the kids, but with the house to pay for. Like, he just left.
Yeah.
She's treading water. So if she's going to show up late because she's got a job to pay the bills, barely pay the bills, and come here because she's trying to figure out how to get out from underneath this financial mess, then the YouTube biddies can pipe down. But I always got the sense it was also like, well, you know, her husband left her and she's going through a divorce. It's just kind of like that whole judgy thing too.
Yep.
So maybe not. Maybe they were just being irrational about her showing up late. But even then it was bad enough. But I'm sure if I did sense it, it was within the children's pastor group people of Jeff, and Jeff's acting this way, and the divorce and blah blah blah. So
well,
right.
Before we continue on, we are drinking Sir Hops-A-Lot Baby God Hops, West Coast IPA from Jack Rabbit Brewing Company, based out of Sacramento, California. It is parental advisory, explicit content within. Coming in at a 6.4% alcohol by volume. How are you feeling about it, Tim?
It is really, really bitter on the back.
It's bitter on the back. It's got a nice caramel kind of.
Yeah, I like it, but man, it's got that what I jokingly refer to as that soapy flavor on the back. It's so bitter. I like it.
Yeah, it's really tasty.
I think it's the second Jack Rabbit we've had, and we've enjoyed both of them.
Yeah, it might be second or third. I like the Baby Got Back reference. Learned something funny about, what is it? I think I mentioned it a couple episodes ago. Family Guy kind of made a reference to 80s rap guys versus 90s rap guys. And I don't think I really understood it until this last week, kind of doing a lot more digging on kind of trying to get information for the podcast that we're going to be doing about our music and stuff. And oh my gosh, 90s rap guys were out for blood. They killed people. Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, like Tupac died, Biggie died. Those are 90s rap guys. And I gotta be careful what I say here, because like if this ever gets back to him, I literally all the Crips in Los Angeles might be coming after me. MC Hammer apparently has put out hits on people that have like shit talked him in their songs before, or like shit talked his mom.
No, he's a good Christian boy. I don't know what you're talking about.
And like there's
the lyrics were much more
everybody was talking about how he's like this pop artist
and so like innocent, dare we say, compared to when NWA came around and Public Enemy. But no, behind the scenes, no, they were actually hardcore.
No, they're hardcore. And I mean, like, I knew that those guys were hardcore, but I didn't know that they were just, like, tossing out hits on, like, guys that just, like, drag their name through the mud. Like,
Well, if they grew up in L.A., I mean, that was the height of Bloods and Crips warfare, and it,
yeah, 100%.
people were getting dropped all left and right for looking all
I
crooked-eyed.
literally heard a story about there was a rap group, and I'll make sure that I have it for when we talk about. I'll probably bring it up when we talk about Tupac because there's no MC Hammer on the list. But
Thank God.
there was a '90s group that one of the guys decided to talk about MC Hammer's mom, and like they got phone calls from Crips, and they were like, "You come to California and we're gonna kill you," and they were like, "We ain't scared of shit." They pull up through California and they hire a Crip to like guard them. They nearly get pulled up on in a mall in Los Angeles. All dudes in blue bandanas. The Crip has to like sign them off. They go to a radio station. They know that they're there. Hammer calls them while they're there. And he's like, "Hey, do you guys have anything you want to say to me?" And they were like, "No, we don't have anything we want to say to you." Click, hangs up the phone. 2 minutes later, they say, "You get the fuck out of Los Angeles or we kill you before you make it to the plane." They immediately get escorted out and Crips follow them all the way there, brandishing weapons as they drive all the way to the airport to get the fuck out of Los Angeles. Insane. I was like, and this is all true. Like, I'm like, what the hell? Over fucking can't touch this guy?
Yeah.
Like, I guess you really can't touch this, bro. Listen.
So happy my favorite color is green.
Hey, MC Hammer, nothing but love. That's what I'm going to say on a recording. Actually, really, I love
the
listening
parachute
to it.
pants.
Yeah, I was like, big fan. That's all I could say. But geez, I'm just like, oh my gosh. So, Sir Mix-a-Lot, 1992. Again, making our 90s rap references here. So
The other Jackrabbit we only had one other, and it was the Hank the Tank West Coast,
that one was delicious.
which
I
was a
remember
reference to old school. So Frank the Tank. the
Yes.
Tank. So Jackrabbit makes very clever labels and good beer. So
that. Yes, very good.
that was from our revolutionary cosplay episode.
Oh, nice.
So that was about 6 weeks ago, I think.
All right. Continuing on. So we kind of talked about the kids. We talked about the early stages of your relationship, some of that kind of stuff. Let's talk about your marriage. What do you feel like for yourself? Because, and I think people need to know this, and so that's really important. What do you feel like is the most damaging thing that you feel that with your marriage with Danica you have had to be a part of repairing in the marriage from 2 divorces? As far as there is obviously some trauma, some damage here. It may not be super traumatic for her, but maybe for you, as far as how does that affect your guys' relationship? And over the 20 years that you guys have been married, what is it that you have had to be a part of where you're just like, yeah, this is something that I've had to recognize is this is not about me. This is about what happened previously.
So I would say I've been fortunate. That I think a lot of healing was done with her through Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So a lot of her trauma got dealt with. I mean, she's had to see therapists, but that's from some other things too. But I mentioned before the three fights. So every time we've had a fight, and like I said, there's only been 3 actual heated, if not yelling. Instantly, I felt really bad about it.
Yeah.
Just knowing that that's probably triggered something, and I could tell in how she was reacting that I'm triggering something which was a defense mechanism from what was going on before. So, and because of that, anytime we fought, the reconciliation hasn't been like a day or a couple days, or like I've never slept in another on the couch, or she's never slept in another bedroom. It's always been like probably by lunch she's at work, and somebody's on the phone apologizing. We're mutually apologizing. So, so I think largely I've been fortunate in that sense.
Well, that's good. Do you have any advice for anybody that would be in a situation where the spouse that has been through a divorce has had this damaging thing that they need repairing for them?
Yeah. One, you need to be mindful of what the abuse was. Look, nobody should be engaging in abuse or, detrimental behavior towards your spouse. Stipulating that but also stipulating we are flawed. We have our own foibles. If you're going to go into that relationship, you need to ask that person to be very honest and open about what went on before. You also need to be very open and honest in assessing, having your lie detector test on to see if they're bullshitting you on. I got fortunate. I married someone that I could tell, and I will maintain, was pretty much, this wasn't one of those two sides kind of things. Danica will appreciate this. She was a moron who married two bad dudes, but this wasn't a thing where it was like, oh, we're in irreconcilable differences or of that kind of thing. So if you are dating someone, interested in someone who's married, find out why they got divorced. If they say it's irreconcilable differences, that's a red flag. That is a red flag. What were those irreconcilable differences? Oh, well, we didn't agree on having children, or he wanted his job. If you're separating over career and whose career is going to win and whether or not we're having children, then I'm not saying walk away, but then you need to then sit down and be very intentional with that person about where you're going. Because if you're willing to throw a marriage over decisions, and look, we grow, I think this is where culture has hurt, because you see it all the time in TVs and movies. Well, I thought my career was important. I thought my career was important. Okay, I guess we're not going to be married anymore, or we're going to end this even. You're not married, but I think we need to make a bigger deal about being. We don't make a big enough deal about being engaged. Like, we're pretty much there. We just haven't done the ceremony. And for most of us, let's be honest, we're already having sex and sleeping together. So, like, now all of a sudden we're having a discussion like, well, I thought my career was more important. I thought mine was. No, we're either in this or we're not.
Right.
So if the previous relationship was irreconcilable differences, you need to make sure that person has wised up and matured and figured out, like, what is important.
Yeah.
If you're either committed to me and I'm committed to you, and one of us, particularly for Christians, that means one of us, yes, is probably going to have to die to oneself more than the other.
Yeah.
But this thing that we're building, whether you have children or not, is more important than what job you have, which frankly you might not have in a year, or you might get bored with. If it is something where you're dating a female and she's been physically abused or she's been verbally abused, or if you're a female and you're dating a guy and he's been divorced and he's telling you that he was emotionally abused, you need to know right away. I gotta steer. Like, again, we shouldn't be engaging in that to begin with. But if you're a female and you're dating someone and he's clearly been worked over by a woman who used emotional terrorist tactics on him, then don't do that. Talk to him like an adult. Don't use emotion to get your way with things and that kind of thing. By the same token, if you're a male, she's been physically, verbally abused, then you need to go out of your way to be sweet and not bring up confrontation.
Yeah.
And yes, in the grand scheme of things, we should behave that way anyway. And I guess I think that's really what at the end of the day, the reason why Danica and I have worked is because it's not just because I've been mindful of not triggering things, but it's worked just because it's worked.
Yeah.
And it's worked in a large part because we decided she'd had 2 failed marriages. I had waited until 32, to be perfectly honest, to seriously date. I mean, I casually dated it at college, and I very casually, very rarely, it was all basically just like like going out with a girl to have drinks or dinner. There wasn't even really romantic things involved because I just, look, when you hear people talk about starting a business and you throw everything at it 100%, it is that way. If you really want to succeed, for a lot of times it's that way. You don't have time for what oftentimes is just, particularly when you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, emotional, stupid drama. I don't have time for this.
Right.
I'm trying to make payroll.
Right.
And I was very good at, like, this is more important and I need to get here. But then, like I said, once I was there, I was ready to do it. And because I was ready to not date, I wasn't interested in dating. I wasn't interested in playing the field. I wasn't interested in going out on the town and meeting people and even, like, buying people. It was just like, no, I'm going to do this. If I want to go out and have drinks, I'm going to go have drinks with the same jackasses I went to high school with.
Right.
Because I can trust them. I'm not going to go out and waste my time with a bunch of females. So she was in a position where this is it. This is the last shot. Or I might not even marry again. I mean, I don't. Yes, she was on the dating site, but I think if she was back in here, she was willing to just be like, if I don't find the right person, I'm also okay with that. I'm not putting my kids through another bad decision.
Right.
And so, I don't know if I answered the question.
No, I think that was good. I think that you gave some good advice for those that are entering or are possibly considering entering a relationship with somebody who has. Sorry, we have people letting off fireworks.
Yeah, sorry. It's what 3 weeks before,
yeah, it's
but
late
it's
June.
still
Mid to
fireworks
late
season.
June. It's fireworks.
I basically live out in the country, edge of town, so.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. So I think that was good advice to give for people that are walking in where it's like there's things to repair there. I mean, you did talk about how you're like, yeah, I didn't necessarily have to repair things, but there's still elements where it's like, yeah, you should be mindful of this when you're going in. Both sides need to be mindful of that going in, because no matter what. If we believe that when we're talking about the scriptures and what it talks about divorce, we have to believe that mainly what they were talking about when it comes to divorces is that there is damage that is involved through that process. And so if you can avoid that as much as possible, that would be ideal for you guys. But if it's not doable or whatever, then how do we heal that, right? Like that's part of that process that we have to go through, especially now with the United States looking up to about 40 to 50% of most marriages ending in divorce. And it usually rests around 50%, 40%. I mean, like, I'm trying to give a little bit of credit to the different studies and all that kind of stuff. So, how do we heal from that, where a lot of people are trying to enter into a relationship with a divorced spouse or something like that, and trying to heal from that? Because again, because we believe that there is probably, I don't think it's something that you immediately get to just cut away and there's no problems with that. That's I don't think that that's even how. That's why when we talk about sex with teenagers, that's something that we need to acknowledge with them as well, is that this is something extremely intimate. And when you share that intimacy with several different people, there are going to be problems that are caused by that. And so we believe that same thing with divorce, is that there are problems that are caused through divorce, and things that you're going to have to deal with after the fact. It's not as simple, just cut and dry. You just get to walk away and be hunky-dory for the rest of your life. And that's where my next question is going to be about. I want to walk through these, and I want you to elaborate a little bit more, because I don't think you elaborated on all of them. You were just kind of in the process of reading them, and I think that you were.
Yeah, I just, the ones where I
100%.
didn't agree.
And that's why I wanted to go through them step by step, and you to elaborate on the ones that you agree with and the ones that you disagree with, based off of that, because again, I think some of that is talked about through this process.
Yeah.
So, sound good?
Yeah.
So first off, the foundation father says, number one, a divorce, whatever the reason, is never to be celebrated. And I'm just going to read the top part, because he read through the stuff before, and you know the gist of it. So first off, divorce, whatever the reason.
Yeah, that one for 100%, and I think he's good to bring that up. If you're living in an well, we live in a small town. Technically, it's a small town.
In California, at least.
So I was going to say, like, maybe where you live, this isn't a thing, but I mean, we're like Bible Belt for California, although even that's anyway. Maybe you've never heard of divorce parties have become a thing. I find it repugnant.
You can have Trivia King show up for your divorce party.
Yeah, I mean, when we were doing trivia nights, the company that was putting on trivia night was advertising that as something they could come and do trivia night at your divorce party, and every time they did, I cringe. Look.
I remember seeing it, and I was like, "Is that a thing?"
Yeah. Look, divorce is. Here's where I put it this way. Where I disagree, we've vehemently disagreed on previous occasions with people and how they address a divorce in each situation. It's been with a female, but whether it's with a male or a female, if I'm a pastor, and I think when we continue to go through this list, I think this is going to continue to get flushed out. I think if you're a pastor, you need to be brutally honest. Divorce is evil in Jesus' eyes. But you know what's more evil? Is you getting beaten up on a regular basis. You being told that you're no good wife or whatever. That's worse. But let's not be, this isn't something to celebrate. This isn't liberation. So let's not swing it from this is an abomination and you're going to inflict God's wrath on you to, I'm being liberated from my slavery to the toxic masculinity that was my asshole husband from college. No. What has happened is still terrible. And if there's kids involved, then we'll get to that in a minute. But even if not, the next time you meet a guy or a girl, you're going to have questions that you did not previously have, because what you thought, whether we think it's all romantic, even the most cynical person towards romantic, it's all romantic hoo-ha bullshit, marriage is just a social construct, you still, when you put that ring on, you stand in front of a bunch of people, you think you're making some kind of commitment. And when I can tell you, as someone who's signed contracts and had those contracts violated from a business standpoint, it has the same earth-shattering thing of apparently contracts are not what they say they are. When you agree to someone that this is the most important thing you're going to do with somebody, and then it turns out that that person didn't mean it, and two, they weren't the person at all that you thought they were, or even, oh, I saw those signs and I convinced myself, even if it's that, even it's, he had a temper and I just thought it was X or Y. Even that, because that then leads you to question whether or not you have an ability to pick up on things. There's no way around it. It is not something to be celebrated. It is going to damage you and everyone else you've included in on this thing.
Yep. All good on number 1?
Yeah.
Number 2, a divorce will not lessen the fighting or strife in your life.
I think that's generally the case. I don't know that that's always the case. I think modern relationships are kind of odd. I know of 3 or 4 where it's actually the opposite, where they get separated. I know of a couple that they divorced. They had a daughter. They still lived in the same damn house, and they were functioned better, divorced, not married, with him living on one side of the house and her living on the other, while the daughter was going through junior high and high school. So generally speaking, yes, and I think it's fine to speak. Actually, that's one thing where we revolt, we get repulsed from speaking in generalities in our postmodern. No, it's generalities are for a reason. So yes, generally speaking, that is absolutely the case. And just to make it personal, you separate. Just putting it in my situation. Danika's the ex that was my youngest's dad. He was lucky because he never had to deal with me coming around inserting myself. Danica and him did not fight all that often over Jeff. There were instances where they did. I never inserted myself for the very purpose of turning this from 9 to 20. Because once the ex comes, the new guy comes around, that just sends it to a whole other level. But yes, if it's what a lot of relationships are, where there are 2 step parents and 2 parents, and unlike my situation where I was kind of like, I'm staying out of this and letting the biological parents make the decisions, and even if I disagree, like I told Danica, there might be situations where I disagree and I will tell you in private. And if you still think I'm wrong, I will support you 100%. And there were a couple instances where the way it was kind of how she handled the kid. And I just stood there and I let her handle it. And then afterwards I said, I think you might have been overreacted or underreacted to that. But it was always done in private. 9 times out of 10, I'm sorry, you will not get that. You're going to have some stepmom, new wife, insert herself in and say, well, you're just not being very helpful to Johnny, and we're trying to do this. It gets very messy, very sticky, and the same bullshit you were fighting over before, you're fighting over again.
Yeah, I think that number 2, because Tim asked my opinion. I don't have opinions on all of these, but I do think that number 2 is kind of a cautionary tale to anybody that's sitting there and they're thinking about divorce and they're just like, yeah, we're just arguing a lot. Arguing, I don't think just sitting there, and I mean, I know that Tim said that we've only had 3 arguments, but again, argument is also a personality.
Oh, when I mean argument, I mean like knockdown, yeah.
No, but even then, I'm saying like arguments are, believe it or not, they also I don't want to say 9 times out of 10, but I want to say that a lot of times it really does come down to personality.
Sure.
Some people are just, and people are just arguers. Like,
Correct.
that's just it. Is like I'm combative. And they're competitive when it comes to arguing and that kind of stuff. And so that can escalate. And so if they're sitting there and they're like, yeah, all of a sudden out of nowhere, you're just like, they're like, I just feel like I'm in arguments all the time. And it's like, well, yes, you are. But have you looked at yourself recently and about how that's going to go? So if you're sitting there and you're like, you're thinking about getting a divorce just because you're in arguments all the time, I would reflect on you as a person.
100%. Yeah.
And just be like, okay, is this really, and this is actually to Tim, where Tim had said earlier, where he's like, yeah, there's problems, but I'm like, is that worth even getting in an argument over? You know, like, is that something that I just need to compromise on, where it's like X, Y, or Z, or is it just something where I'm just like, okay, like, am I just being overreactive? That kind of stuff, where a lot of that stuff needs to be reflective on that particular person. That's feeling that we're in arguments all the time. And it's
Right.
like, are you looking for arguments? Also, be evaluative of other stressors in your life. One of the actually the leading cause of divorce to this day is still money. Again,
Yep.
are you even if you're not even if you're the type that is not anal about spending, you're the freelancer or whatever.
Yeah.
The free spirit when it comes to money. Are you agreeing together, because that is what you signed on for, a way to spend your funds, to save your funds, to make ends meet? And so that's kind of where, again, that's not an argument with the relationship. That's just an argument with one facet of how that person spends their money. And also, again, what we need to recognize through that is, how were they raised? What were some of those things growing up for them? This is why I think always premarital counseling is really great. I got to experience that with our pastor who married us, Brandon. And Brandon asked us some questions. And I had to be honest with, and Audrey and I got to have some really good conversations before we got married about different things, as far as like, what did vacations look for you guys growing up?
Right.
That seems like a really weird question to ask, right? Like, to ask.
No, but it's not, because
because when you go on a vacation, one person has one idea of how a vacation should look, and another person has a completely different idea of how vacation should look.
Right. One is, I want to sit around a pool with an all-inclusive and do nothing. And then one's like, what are you talking about? I want to go see the sights and do this and do that.
100%. And you're like, what the hell? Well, and it's so funny, because I'm that way with everything, except the fun one is Disneyland. So Audrey got introduction into how my family does Disneyland. In my lifetime, my parents have only taken us to Disneyland. This next week will be the 4th time that we've ever been to Disneyland. We're not the Disney family. We don't go all the time, but we really enjoy it when we go. But because we only go every 5 years, or every 6 years, or 7, 8 years, I think this is going to be the first time I've been there in 10 years, we go from doors open and we stay there till doors close. Like, that's how my parents do Disneyland. That's how we've always done it growing up.
That sounds even worse.
So that sounds terrible to you, right?
It's like $800 in meals.
Audrey's sister has worked at Disneyland. So Audrey has had free tickets to Disneyland her entire life growing up. So Audrey believes that you just go to Disneyland from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and that's it.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, that's.
Why would anyone go stay after 6 unless there's the light show?
That's exactly.
At Christmas.
No, she's like, that's just when you come back.
Yeah, you go. Yeah, you go have dinner somewhere else and you come back
exactly.
for the electric show, light show.
That's Audrey's mentality when it comes to Disneyland, and so if you think that I'm super stressed out about this trip, she's hearing my sister talk about the fact that she wants to be there at 8 a.m. and be there till 1 a.m. or whatever, and she's like, oh my gosh, this sounds like this is gonna be horrific for me. And so like that's really overwhelming for my wife right now. Again, but those are legitimate conversations that you need to have before you go into a marriage where it's like, okay, and yeah, when it comes to how do you spend money? How did your parents spend money growing up?
Yep.
Where it's like, because believe it or not, we become our parents. So if your parents were like money pinchers and you were looking for this, I'll give you guys a little glimpse into my life. I'm a purger. I don't like keeping on to shit. I hate it. Audrey's family from the Midwest where they keep everything. Okay? And so like our worlds collided into two completely different things. My fridge stresses me the fuck out. Like I don't think that we need to save half a yogurt for my daughter when it just costs 80 cents to buy another fucking yogurt. Like, stop keeping it in there, and it just stays there for 3 days. Audrey and I had to work on leftovers for a minute. I do believe... I'm not huge into leftovers. I'm very selective about the meals that I want to keep. Like, I'm like, okay, that one tastes good, leftover, that one not so much. You know, like I'm like,
yeah.
And it depends on how much we ate and all that kind of stuff. And since my wife's gone gluten free, we've actually been able to, and she didn't go gluten free. Like since she found out she was allergic to gluten, we were able to kind of like downsize our meals because you can only buy pasta in like the half amount, and that was usually where we had excess was pasta meals, where it's like you can only buy a pound of pasta, but it's like okay. There's only two of us. Like, we're not going to eat.
And pasta's always hard to like. How much do I need to make in pasta just for us? And then the sauce ratio, or
yeah, exactly. So they do 8 ounces, and so I've been able to kind of scale it and all that kind of stuff to work with whatever it is that we're making. Or I add a lot more veggies and that kind of stuff. But but through that process, like leftovers, Audrey could not part with. If there was excess food left over, had to take it home. And it was like, or had to put it in a box or put it in a container and stuff. And I was like, but the worst part, just so we're clear, and I'm putting my wife on blast for this, but nobody would fucking eat it. So it just sits there in the fridge for like 2 or 3 weeks sometimes. I'm gonna say days, but 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm like, nobody ate this, and so it just took up room in our fridge, and we just threw it away. Like, what makes it different from throwing it away? Because it would break her heart when we would throw it away right after we made the meal. She'd be like, no, we can't do it. So wasteful. Yeah, it's so wasteful. and then 2 or 3 weeks later, we throw it away anyways. That's just so frustrating to me. So, also, just so we're clear, that's a pet peeve of mine at restaurants. If you're doing that at restaurants, fuck you. Because stop doing that. Stop asking for a box when you know you're not going to eat it later. But it's like, oh, it's rude to leave an empty plate or not have an empty plate or whatever. That's also part of the reason what's wrong with America and the obesity thing is you're just like, well, I can't have an empty plate, so I got to take it home or I got to finish it all or whatever. Just, if you're done, say you're fucking done. Like,
it's not my problem if you overportion.
Yeah, and like, yeah, it's already way overportioned in most American settings, but my wife is like, oh, we got to take it home. We take it home. It sits in the fridge. I threw out like 3 things of hummus because like, you know, the people at Pita Kebab come up and they're like, you want to take the hummus home too? And my wife's like, yeah, never touches it. Like, but those are the things that you need to know about your spouse going in where it's like, it seems minuscule, but it's like, but those are the things that you're going to have to compromise or work through. Cause like I said, like, it seems weird that like the refrigerator feels like my space, but like when I go grocery shopping and I'm the one who does the grocery shopping and I'm the one who does the cooking for my family. And so like when I'm trying to put stuff in there and try to keep the space, you know, a specific way, and then out of nowhere, all of a sudden I've got 5 different leftover containers that nobody's fucking eating. Like, you know, and then Audrey's like, well, you didn't eat it. And I'm like, I told you from the start I wasn't going to eat this leftover. Pasta is no good leftover, by the way.
Can I also... We're getting a little off topic, but that's what we do on the show. Can I point out this is kind of a problem with...
We never do that on the show.
Having smaller families. when there's 4 or 5 kids, you really figure out really quick that the world doesn't revolve around you, and you got to compromise either with mom and dad or
Yeah.
4 other assholes in the house. And I think one of the consequences of us having more and more 1, even 2 child families, and look, I think Colton's probably going to have only 1 or 2, so this isn't like a guilt thing, but it's something you're gonna have to navigate. It's really easy when you're an adult, when you grow up, to be like, wait, don't I get my way?
Yeah.
No, this is like a relationship or a family. Like, I get my way, right? Like, I complain enough or whatever. Like, you're going to give me what I want. No, that's not how this works. And so I think a lot. And then on top of it, the way so many parents, even within non-divorced families, but particularly in divorced families, because mommy and daddy got to make it up to Billy and Sue for splitting up. So now I got to go out of my way. There's always one of the parents has got to be the cool one to make it up. So to somehow we're going to solve all the trauma that we've done from this divorce, and so we're going to make it up to you by giving you everything you want. Well, guess what you're doing? Well, we can get to that in a minute, because now I'm answering another question. So yes, you're not solving anything by...
Yeah, if you're sitting there and you're thinking that arguments are not going to happen because of this, I think you need to embrace the fact, before you go into a marriage, you also need to embrace the fact that people are coming in with their own lifestyles, their own expectations of how life is supposed to go.
Correct.
And both of you are going through that. And it's definitely not going to change overnight. There's going to be discussions,
right,
arguments,
correct,
if you're combative like that. Okay. One person's style of cleaning is completely different than another person's style of cleaning. Or what one person accepts as cleanliness is completely different than another person's acceptance of cleanliness. Those are natural conversations. If you're arguing over that, like, and you're sitting there being like, we never argued before, and then just out of nowhere, like, I just feel like we're arguing over blah 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 blah, and it's like, yeah, that's the same shit that you have with roommates, because you're learning to function and live together. And your spouse shouldn't just become your roommate, but you do have to recognize that they are your roommate in some aspects of, you guys are both having to learn how to live with one another.
Yeah.
And yeah, at some point, the hormones fucking die down. Like, you're no longer just like, how do we solve this problem? I don't know. Let's just fuck it out.
Yeah.
Like, that's a reality that people have to acknowledge, where it's like, okay, once all of the hormones die down, how do we function together? And so I think that's good. Number 3. Your children will put on a good face, and you'll be able to pretend everything is okay, that you made the right decision. But they're not okay.
Yeah, that... Well, doesn't he go on further about... Or is that the next... There's another one.
If you want me to continue, it's just you force them to take responsibility for your own selfishness and failure, which is a rough way to finish that one off.
Yeah, that one's absolutely true. I mean, look, if kids are involved, there's just no way around it. You're screwing them up. Now, it's not irreparable, but if you're not willing to acknowledge that you're doing lasting damage, I don't care how young they are, even if they're, let's say, 2, but mom and dad stay in this strange state that's something, we talk about, as much as we like to talk about evolution and how human nature is, we really like to throw it out when it comes to all these things that we find really inconvenient and icky to deal with. And so, yeah, if you want to call it human nature or evolution or whatever, yes, it is part of the species to where if you're 2 and then at some point at like age 8 or 12 or whatever, you go like, this isn't really, this isn't the way things are supposed to be, that mom and dad don't live in the same house.
Yeah.
And I'm going back and forth.
Yeah.
It's not like that's not a religious taboo or some social taboo that's been ingrained in them. Like stuff people try to tell each other, well, boys gravitate toward guns and girls towards Barbies because it's a social construct. Divorce is not a social construct. It is a thing. It is the breaking of an important relationship.
The murder. No, I'm just kidding.
That one
yeah, I think that one's coming up next. But so for those of you that have never heard of it before, there's this thing that's called an ACE score. ACE score is actually child psychologists will use this as and actually students when they get evaluated for psyche evals receive an ACE score. And an ACE score simply is how many traumatic instances have occurred in your lifetime. If you are over the number 3 incidences, your level, and they can actually from there. So if you have more than 3 ACE incidents in your life, you can have the statistics. You become a statistic at that point, where alcoholism skyrockets for you personally. So if you received a higher than a 3 ACE score, and as you continue to get more ACE points, your life expectancy goes lower, your risk of alcoholism. So kind of what Tim was talking about earlier when he was talking about Dr. Love, is that what it was?
Dr. Drew.
Dr. Drew. Again, that's sorry, not the Kiss song.
Dr. Love.
That's what they call me. So as your ACE score goes up, your life expectancy goes down, your chances of alcoholism goes up, your risk of heart failure, anxiety, depression, they all go up because you have experienced traumatic instances in your childhood. One of the traumatic instances that you can possibly have that gives you 1 point on your ACE score is a divorce. And the hard part is, and the reason why lots of kids have a lot of these issues as they grow older, teen violence is also associated with this, chances of going into jail. Just so you know, I have an ACE score of 6. That's my ACE score. And my parents were never divorced, so that's 1 point that didn't get knocked on my thing. But so ACE scores, again, these traumatic events happen, and so we're able to kind of track. So when we talk about kids that have rough backgrounds and stuff, we're looking at kids that probably have an ACE score of like 8, 10, 12. Okay, they've had several, and these can be things like dad beats mom in the home, parents are divorced, has experienced homelessness or is living in poverty. Mom or dad abuses recreational drugs or alcohol. There's lots of different things that can all be traumatic events for children. Okay, the hard part about divorce is that oftentimes what we find with ACE scores and divorces is that we're looking at about 4 to 5 ACE points that can possibly be attributed in just the divorce. Where we find that as one of the problems that's actually masking 5 other problems. Right? We're seeing dad beat mom. We're seeing alcoholism in one of the 2. We're seeing, death in the family or something like that. And we're talking immediate family. We're not talking about like grandpa died or something like that. These are all things that can cause traumatic issues in children, and we see that when it comes to divorce, that it brings a lot of that kind of stuff out. So children are going to put on a good face. They'll be able to pretend that everything is okay, at least at first. But there is some kind of selfishness and failure. And so I think that the ACE score is good for people to keep in mind moving forward. And because I have a couple of questions later that kind of talk about kids and how that looks. But number 4, a divorce is a murder.
No.
Was hatred murder?
No, look, the divorce is a murder thing that's overwrought stupidity. But the following,
I think it's just over exaggerated.
Yeah, but
like sure, the relationship has died in a sense, but like
when he should have just he's looking for a dun dun dun. No, he should have just said the husband and wife. Well, he should have just said it's a catastrophic failure or something. It's a generational sin or something like that, but not murder. When he says the husband and wife are one flesh and destroying it kills something that was alive and whole, dismembering it. Yeah, that's true. And destroying that has all kinds of rippling effects within the family. You have the more divorces you have within community, within society, then it starts just leading to an overall disintegration of it. Again, I thought this meant something. It doesn't mean something. Well, apparently I'm signing on, what else does it mean what it says it means?
Yeah.
It is. You know what? It is. I'll throw him a bone. It is a murder in the way that. Hatred is murder? No, Cain killing Abel is a murder where. It is a particular. It's easy to say this within children, but I think that extends if you have parents, if both kids have parents who weren't divorced, whether or not there was some dysfunction within those families and they didn't divorce and they still stuck together. Once you introduce divorce into a family lineage, again, regardless of whatever other dysfunction is going on, keeping that marriage together, yes, I think it is a catastrophic, world-shattering event that happens, and it does create problems that are hard to recover from. And again, we're having this discussion because I'm hoping at the end of this we can, and we're now at like 2 hours and 40 minutes, but I'm hoping at the end of this we can wrap this up with why I wanted to bring this up, and I think Colton will agree. But okay, so yeah, it's a bit overwrought, but it's also, this is a huge thing. This is like earth-shattering, particularly if there's children involved. And to the previous point, the older the children are, they're going to feel somehow, because they're part of this thing, that they're somehow responsible for mom and dad not getting along.
Yeah.
Particularly if they hear you arguing, like I said earlier, about, well, I'm getting a really good job. It'll make us more money. Little Timmy doesn't want to move. He's got friends. Well, we talked about getting a bigger house and blah blah blah. But yes, but then, well, now he's thinking, well, I'm responsible for this because they can't agree whether or not mom and dad should get dad, we should move because dad's getting
parents.
And if you think that I'm making light that doesn't happen, I think when you have divorce at the rate that it has, don't tell me that the divorce rate is 50% and a good portion of those 50% divorces are multiple divorces, like my wife. Don't tell me it's because these people just keep finding themselves where one spouse is finding an abusive spouse. No, a lot of this is just like, no, we agree to disagree. We're moving on. Screw we're just gonna get divorced.
Number 5, divorce is contagious.
Yeah, I would say that. Well, that's certainly the case. It's interesting. He mentions friends. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. That's probably true. It's like, well,
I haven't seen anything where it's like, as far as so far in my life. I mean,
I haven't seen anything like that, but I could see.
I haven't seen
not
it,
to throw
but I do think
secular people under the bus, but like I could see like, well, Carol left her husband. And I don't know why I couldn't.
Actually, one of my favorite movies for this whole situation, and I think it's actually a cautionary tale, and I hope that some people like this movie, some people don't. But actually, I think that it's a really good depiction of a breakup, and it's The Breakup with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why I like it is actually because I think it's a cautionary tale about listening to your fucking friends. Because at both of them at some point sit there and say, hey, I should go and apologize. And I should try, and it's not about like, and both of them had the realization of it's not about me and I'm just going to go submit to them and just like whatever they want is whatever. But they should sit there and say, hey, I apologize, but I want to repair this and like fix the situation. But yet their friends the entire time are like, no, you shouldn't have to apologize. You should, like, this is what it is. And I have a friend who has gotten divorced, and his father is terrible when it comes to advice. His father's on his 4th marriage, I think. And his father's like, well,
Yeah, it's just like a bankruptcy. Once you've done it once, it's no big deal.
It's more like, well, it's kind of what you were talking about earlier, where it's like, well, if you see those signs, then like, like those aren't going to go away. So like, you should probably get out now. And like, that's the kind of advice that he gives. And it's just like, okay, they had a fight over something stupid. And it's like, oh, well, I mean, like, it's only going to get worse from there. And that's the kind of advice that his dad gives him. And so, yeah, no shit that he just decides, like, yeah, I'm going to walk out on this relationship, like, and treat it just like it's a girlfriend.
The other movie everybody should watch, particularly if you have kids, watch Kramer versus Kramer. It's 1979. It's Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep. And it is one of the most unpleasant, but very, very, very... They've got a single... They share one young kid, and it's one of those movies where you watch it once and you're like, that was amazing. I can see why I won Academy Awards. Never watching that ever again.
Right.
And it was a very, for 79, when divorce was really starting to pick up, it was like, yeah, this is what we're doing. And I don't know if, anyway, yeah, it is a raw depiction of two people with a kid getting divorced, and it's got, I mean, the irony at the end is that it's the mom who doesn't want custody of the boy because, again, her career's taking off and he's just a distraction, and so, which is kind of, well, that's a discussion. Anyway.
Well, and divorce is contagious, so I think our final thoughts on that are just like,
I think it's more contagious with the children of divorce than it is within social circles, for sure.
Well, and also just be mindful of who you listen to, and who you seek advice from when you're arguing and when things are going south. Again, be mindful of who you're disclosing information to.
Right.
We've talked about that before. I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast, but just like, if you're having problems in your marriage, probably telling some other guy or telling some other girl when you're the male, or if you're a male and you're talking to another girl about your marital problems, or you're a girl talking to another guy about your marital problems, that's not really helpful.
No.
So just keep that in mind.
Can I, just because it does kind of relate to this, can I give I have a half-baked, but I think half fully baked. It's a half baked, but I think there's some truth to it. Theory as to why divorce is the way it is right now. we've talked about how we went on breakneck speed from gays in the closet to gays getting married to now the alphabet
It's the gays.
soup.
That's what you're talking about.
No,
the
no, no.
gays are the
But
reason for the...
Society
No, just-
changed quickly. We went very quickly to where at the same time we were injecting women having their own careers. The law got changed to no fault divorce. And so before, let's just be honest, a woman put up with a lot more shit at home when she wasn't working and had no way to take care of herself. It was like, okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Because mom and dad aren't able to take care of me, or mom and dad aren't around anymore. Like, 100 years ago, mom and dad lived in Buffalo and we decided to move somewhere else. So your choices were a lot more limited. Now that women are working, so you got two career people and relatively no fault divorce, although that's not really true. Particularly that's only true if kids aren't involved. If kids are involved, that's not true. It's really messy. I think a lot of what's going on right now is society trying to work itself out, and the problem is when society is working itself out, those of us living through it are like, what's going on, and we don't see it because it takes only a decade or two to create the problem, which is what happened.
Yeah.
It took only a decade or two between in the 50s and 60s to then women starting to work and no fault of divorce to make divorce really easy. And I think even a non-religious, non-Christian culture over time is going to figure this out and say, like, this doesn't really work. Like, marriage has got to mean something at some point. Like, families have to remain intact.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a Jesus believer to see, like, the problems we're creating. And so I think it's going to take probably a few more decades to work it out. Well, I think you're starting to see it where, well, frankly, you are seeing it. It's just in the wrong way where the Gen Z and millennials and younger are like, I'm not getting married because what the hell's the point of it?
Yeah.
And so, and then of course the church gets repulsed by that. Like, oh, this is terrible. Like, no, actually, it's probably better that, would we prefer them to be in loving, permanent relationships? Yes. One man, one woman. But I would prefer them not having children and being living together than doing what we did between the late 70s through the 90s, which led to this, like, screw marriage. It's a joke.
Well, and I have a question for you, since we're kind of diving into that. Where does arranged marriage fit into all of this, where we're looking at 40 to 50% of chosen marriages ending in divorce, but yet only 4% of arranged marriages end in divorce?
That's a good question. I've thought about it myself. I think Shakespeare's to blame to some extent, and I'm only halfway joking. I think when we injected the romantic period and then it went on steroids, it's the romantic period started a couple centuries before, but when we turned love into this lovey-dovey thing, and on top of it, not only said it's just this lovey-dovey thing that's supposed to make me feel good.
Right, it becomes a very selfish.
And then had revulsion to...
Or egocentric.
Right, egocentric. And then on top of it said it is... Sorry, the dogs are tussling because they just ate and they like to tussle after they eat. Hey, enough. We said it's a primitive patriarchal view to where marriage should be duty, responsibility, creating wealth, those kind of things. Just all of those like responsibilities that it used to be.
Right.
Then it just becomes this thing like, I had a heartburn last night and you know what? It made me decide that I don't really like you anymore. or like what you said, like the sex just isn't doing it for me anymore.
Right.
And turns out I don't really like you.
Well, and I think
When
also,
your mouth opens and you just talk and that's all I got, then there's a great line in a movie called The Company Men. It's Topher Grace and Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid says Topher Grace is out of stupidity. Dennis Quaid's boss. But Topher quickly figures out he doesn't have life figured out, and he's being mentored by his assistant, and he's trying to figure out like why are you married to your, like, when did you know you wanted to marry your wife? And he's got this Quaid says, she was the one I wanted to be in a foxhole with. And he was like, what? He said, like, she's the one I want, like, when all things are going to hell and the one person in the world I want to rely on, that's the person I want to rely on.
right.
And it's in some ways a really cheesy line, and in some ways that's what it is. It's like, look, I might have what I want to do, and you might have what you want to do, but at the end of the day, you're the one that I want to be with.
Right. Yeah, and I think, well, and so that's where, is divorce cultural?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where the church is correct. They're correct in pointing it out. We are just terrible in how we're doing it.
Right.
And this is why I wanted to do this episode, to kind of counterbalance the episodes we've done before. The church should lean into divorce is a cultural thing, and it's not something we should be doing. We need to be countercultural. It's just we need to be doing it not by saying you're going to inflict God's wrath. I think we need to be, let's spend less money on fucking lights and lasers and smoke machines on Sunday, and let's have full-time counselors on staff.
Right.
Let's not make the children's ministry bigger. Let's build a building in town that's just a counseling center. When someone comes in and says, I've had it with my husband, I think I'm ready for a divorce. Can you convince him to come in? Yes, I can convince him to come in. Have him meet with a pastor and a counselor. That doesn't work? Okay, you guys are getting a divorce. Let's sit down and have a conversation about this. And it might be with just the female, with the wife. This is what's going to happen. It is going to affect your children. Just be prepared. At some point, you're going to have to your kids are going to need to see a counselor.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
Yep.
They're going to have issues of feeling abandoned and not being enough. It's going to manifest itself in various ways, and you need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
You need to figure out how you got into this, because don't kid yourself that it's all on him. Because, like I said earlier, there's probably a moment earlier on where you're like, wow, that was a little aggressive, and you're like, oh, he just had a bad day.
Yeah.
So let's not just be like, I married the wrong guy and he turned out not to be. All right, well then how do we make sure, if we're going to do this again, that you meet the right guy?
Yeah.
Let's also deal with the trauma that if he or she inflicted trauma on you, let's deal with that trauma as much as we can and mitigate it before you meet a new person, so that guy or gal's not dealing with the detritus and shit left behind by that person. But instead, we just are like, nope, just hang around, just be in that.
Right.
Or I would say there's a liberal side of the church is like, oh no, it just happens, and so we just need to not demonize it. No, there needs to be a healthy middle.
Yeah.
And the middle, like when Danica was in here earlier saying like she felt guilt, she wasn't responsible for those, but there's a level of healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt.
Yeah.
Healthy guilt is healthy guilt is not feeling shame. It should just feel like I've got a divorce. I need to work through some things, and having someone come along and hear your experience and say, oh yeah, that is bad.
Yeah.
But also it helps to have someone who's probably trained to say, yeah, it's really bad, and we're really terrible that that's happened to you. How can we come along and help you out? If you have someone come walking in like with this like the party attitude of I'm liberated, someone's on the market, come on boys, who are the single men in church? No, probably gonna repeat the mistake.
Right.
But that was what, when I read the 10 points, that was what my thought was. Yes, a lot of this is true. And the sooner the church understands this and talks about it, but does it in a loving way, but also does it in an honest way, to where we're not just lying to everybody and saying, oh no, you're free and you're wonderful, and now we're going to find you a nice, wonderful Christian man this time around. You know, the first one just wasn't really a Jesus believer. That's bullshit. There's plenty of men who love Jesus and are terrible husbands. They're not good Jesus followers, but, you know, we all have our problems following Jesus. One of them being men who think they're following Jesus, telling women that they need to stay with an abusive husband. So, you know, I'm not questioning that the pastor who says that isn't a Jesus believer and doing his best to follow Jesus, but I disagree with it. I think it's bad advice. But if the church really believes this is the number one problem, then lean into it and deal with it and stop. The answer isn't trying to put your fingers in the dam or put your fingers in your ears and saying la 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 la, or I'm going to put my fingers in the dam and try to stop this by saying, oh, you're just going to, if you guys keep doing this and you're bringing God's wrath. And I know a lot of churches do try to do. I will say, I don't know what percentage, but I even know around here, and I know at the previous church we were talking about, their pastor would call someone in and try to do pastoral care with someone before they got divorced, if both sides were willing. But I think that's where it stops. And again, where we need to get out of this mode of prayer and the Bible solves everything, and my pastor is somehow a trained trauma specialist, and instead the church pastors say, I am trained on this. I'm barely adequate at running a modern business, and I'm fairly decent to good at standing up for 20 minutes and telling people how to be a Jesus follower, and I'm okay with managing staff. What I am not good is this. And what we're going to do, instead of pissing money away on this thing, we're going to spend money on this. And you know what? Stand in front of the church. And if your church stands up there and says, to hell with those people, then you know what? It's time to quit that church and go somewhere else. I remember one of the first... Well, I'd been there about a year at the church we're at now. And I might have told this story before on the show, but we're at some event. There was a guy there I'd seen before a bunch of times, and he asked me how long I'd been going to the church, and I told him, and I said, how about you? And he said, oh, I've been going here my whole life, and you know, I stuck here. I stuck it through the times when Pastor so-and-so changed the way the church was, and that was when I think we've talked about it before, the predecessor to our current pastor stood up one day and said, Jesus plus nothing equals everything, and completely reoriented the church to being a Jesus-focused church, and half the church left within weeks or months. Total church split, because this guy was like, yeah, we're not a Bible church, we're not this kind of church, we're a Jesus church.
Yeah.
And this guy was like, yeah, I didn't like it, but I grew up in this church, so I'm going to stay. And I didn't really like Forrest when he was preaching either, because I thought it was all a bunch of, like, you know, it wasn't preaching to God's word and what we're supposed to do, what it means to be a Jesus follow Jesus and be God fearing and all that kind of stuff. And then he looks at me and he goes, and then my own daughter, my adult daughter, had a divorce, and I had to reorient my entire way of thinking.
Right.
Now, some of you, well, I don't think anyone listening to this podcast had this notion, but a lot of Christians would probably say that and go, no, actually, she's the one. You should have reoriented your thinking at all. You should have stood up to her and said what she's doing is terrible. And that guy actually, in a very big moment of being vulnerable, because he didn't know where I was coming from, he probably assumed because I was had just started going to that church that I was going to agree with him, but being quite vulnerable with a guy he just started talking to 5 minutes before, it was like, I could have said like, yeah, well, divorce is terrible. I don't know why. But no, he had to reorient what he was thinking and not be so dogmatic, dictatorial about this is what the word of God means, because it happened to his own child. And so I just think there was a church recently that had they had those signs where you just stick the magnetic letters up there. It was, your mouth is full of Bible verses, but your brain's full of hatred or something, or heart's full of hate. And I think that's just how we come across. It's like, oh, the scripture says this, and yes, we can say, oh, we're being loving Christians because we're trying to tell people that they're separating themselves from what God wants and blah 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 blah. No one needs to hear when they're contemplating divorce or having just gone through a divorce that they're going to hell or that they're going to bring God's wrath on them. But what they also don't need to hear is, this is going to be great. You're going to have a new fresh start. Everything's going to be wonderful. Now you can be you. No, you got trying times ahead. There's probably some self-reflection that you need to have. Even if the guy was abusive, there needs to be some self-reflection on, how do I make sure I don't come across as that guy again?
Yeah.
And I've spent most of my time talking about the abusive relationships. I think you're correct. I think a lot of the relationships are just like, we fight too much. And so it's people who don't know. And I think another crackpot theory of mine, I think school, the way we do school with kids, contributes to this. No one's allowed to fight anymore in school. I don't mean like fist fight. I mean like argue. Parents a lot of times don't let their kids argue. Let them argue it out. Guess what? It's not the end of the world when you have a knockdown, drag-out fight. Where you're like, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. At some point, one side or the other, a lot of times, is like, whatever. If you want the freaking last Oreo, keep the Oreo. But when we don't let people at all engage in fighting, and they go through their entire life never having any kind of conflict, as soon as they get in a relationship, it's like, well, that must mean they don't love me.
Right. Or if that's what they've seen.
Yeah, or if that's what they've seen. Anyway, I've gone on and on for 20 minutes. So what do you think? What do you think?
No, I think
I think that what I said was a good way of wrapping up those 10 points of...
No, I was going to say, I don't think we need to continue with the 10 points. I was like, I think that we've addressed a lot of the issues, but I think that, okay, so I want to know, where do we go next from this? I think the last thing that we need to discuss and how to land the plane on this, and I think you talked about part of it, but I want you to clearly define, and I mean, this is a tough question to answer where you're like, I don't know exactly, and that's not what we're looking for, but where we're like, okay, here's some of the things that are kind of like non-negotiables. If you could hit a couple of non-negotiables where it's like, okay, one, the first part of the question is, why should people get divorced? Okay, so we talked about, what this looks like, and we talked about, we can't blame people or whatever, and it's like, okay, and we've talked about, again, yeah, you can't just walk out just because you're having arguments or whatever. But what are some of those where it's like, why should people get divorced? Because people should know that. And I think as a Christian podcast, we should sit there and say, yeah, these are some of those things where it's like, yeah, you need to walk away from that. 2, if you do get a divorce, for whatever reason that's given, what are your recommendations for those people that are trying to still stay in the church or still stay a part of the body of Christ, dealing with some of that shame that maybe we talked about before? And then 3rd, I think you've already hit on this, but I think that this is where we need to land the plane is what is our response as those that are a part of the church body? How are we supposed to respond to those that have been through a divorce, and how do we help that healing process before the end? And so I think that those 3 questions will help round off what is the end of our podcast.
We doing this from a Christian standpoint, or like just an idealistic, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or not Christian?
Well, I think the first one, I mean, I hope that I hope that every conversation that we have, we try to incorporate Jesus into it, and really think about, and I do think that based off of our audience and what we're trying to go with is, as far as people that are listening and what it is that they're listening to for, is we need to acknowledge that that people are leaving the faith, or not leaving the faith, but when it comes to the church setting, and we're talking about leaving a relationship, I think in a church setting, in a Jesus, in somebody who has acknowledged Jesus as their Lord and Savior, or is thinking about it or whatever, what does that look like for them? When is it acceptable for them to be able to get divorced?
Well, I'll deal with I'll lay out one that I think is not a good enough excuse. And good people can disagree with this, people on this. Good people can disagree on this, but I think as Christians, I don't think a spouse stepping out on the other one and cheating is good enough reason for you to just file divorce papers. Now, if they're not, that's assuming that spouse is willing to, who did the cheating, is willing to reconcile. That's gonna need to also mean, like, it just, they're gonna have to deal with trust issues that they've created that aren't gonna go away maybe for years. Like, your access to the internet might be changed, or you're not allowed to work with a female colleague anymore. Like, you got to find a job where you're not working intimately with a female. Like, I'm sorry, that's just that's what you're gonna have to do. Working late at night, several nights in a row. Yeah, if she calls up and asks where you're at, you don't get to overreact and say, "I'm at work. This is my busy time of year." Sorry. You've created those things, and it could have been 5 years ago. Trauma has a long way to go, but I don't think just Christians should just be like, he cheated, she cheated, that's it. There should be some reconciliation that is mediated by a pastor and or a marriage counselor. Definitely a marriage counselor. I think having a pastor involved as well is good, because he's going to give you some spiritual guidance. The marriage counselor is going to give you more practical advice. And if you want to do it really well, you do what a couple did at our church that you and I both know, and he stepped out on his wife, and that man, I will go to my dying days. That man could be a jackass, but I will respect that man forever. He stood in front of a group of 250 people, packed church. He was not someone who's not known in town and not known at church, and stood up and declared to everybody exactly what he'd done to his wife. And he's a former athlete and tough guy, and in an absolute moment of vulnerability broke down and apologized to his wife and the congregation for what he'd done. If you really want, that's how reconciliation happens. if it's from there, it comes down to whether or not both sides. Like, I think one of the posts that guy said was divorce happens because people aren't willing to reconcile. Well, a lot of times it's because one person's not willing to reconcile. You could have one person who's still all in on this thing because he or she loves the other person. They don't understand why this is leading to a separation. They're doing it for the kids. They know it's going to be bad. You got to have two people both willing to do it. So I would say if one person is hell-bent on having a divorce, at that point, you might as well have the divorce. I'm sorry. It's just...
a relationship is a two-way street.
Yeah. So, and that, again, that's my other frustration with a lot of how the church handles things. It's like, well, and if both parties really mean, like this person says, well, I'm willing to reconcile, but you get him in a room and it's like he's just sitting there.
There's no compromise.
He's just sitting there, or he's like, I don't even know why we're here. I'm like, I don't even know what the big deal is. Or she's like, if he would just get off his fat ass and do something. It's like, okay, well, you're not actually here to reconcile.
Right.
Again, look, divorce has been made. Divorce. The divorce that is talked about in the New Testament and the Old Testament has zero relationship to what divorce is today. Zero. And that changed only about 50 years ago. Women weren't allowed to get divorced even in parts of the United States until recently. Women divorcing men is a very modern thing. So basing an entire belief system on something that's dramatically changed, and yes, we can rail about it as Christians, but secular society decided to change it. Okay, that's the way it is. So we have to figure out how to circumvent that. So is it more important to keep someone in... Here's the tricky part, and I go back and forth on this. I think it's situational. There are some people that say it's better for two people who aren't in love with it anymore to stay together until the kids have left the house and then get divorced. And other people say as soon as this thing is over and neither side's willing to reconcile or one side's not in the divorce. For a long time I thought it was better to stay together because again the statistics say this, but the statistics, that's causation, correlation. I think that's a bad thing, and I think it's just as debilitating when you're 22 and off at Berkeley and you find out mom and dad down in La Jolla have decided to get divorced. Well, what? Yeah, well, your father and I have not really been getting along for a long time. That is just as earth-shattering, like, as getting it yanked underneath you when you're 14.
That was one of the 10, by the way. It did say that. I think it was the next one where it's like it's a bomb no matter what age.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because all that does is when you get into a relationship, you're like, are we really in love? Or is there something that she's like, is this really a thing? Or this could just go off at any time, like my mom and dad. Like, we could just wake up one day and just say like, yeah, we just decided it wasn't a thing anymore. And it's like, it's bad. So, yeah. So, that was number one. It's circumstantial, but I think unless if both parties are willing to do it, if someone's cheated and they're really remorseful, then keep it together. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm sorry, it's just you're gonna have to do it.
So, and if you get a divorce, what are your recommendations for those trying to stay in the church?
One, you might have to leave the church and go somewhere else. It's just the part of it. That's just
leave that particular
church and go somewhere else where there's no baggage.
Yeah, and that might be really good for you.
And that might be good for you. And it might not just be like when Danica was in here. It might not just be because your husband's there and it's like, well, we can't coexist. It's because it's just there are memories there.
It's a fresh start.
You don't have no idea what gossip train is going around you that you're not aware of, and you might find out about it later. It's just, I'm going to go somewhere else. These people don't know me, and they're going to be like, okay, you got divorced, it's no big deal.
Yep,
They
and
don't
sometimes-
they don't know the spouse or whatever.
And sometimes, and I've said this a couple times, where just being an invisible participant is really nice.
Right.
At a church where, especially if you're coming from a place where it's like everybody knows you, everybody knows your backstory, everybody knows this, that, and the other about you, and to go someplace where you're completely invisible and nobody knows anything about you, it's just kind of like, oh, this is really nice and refreshing, where you get to disclose the information that you want to disclose. And that's not going to be healthy long term, where you're still going to need to rely on other people and that kind of stuff through that. So if you don't have anybody else to rely on, but for me, I can say that it's really nice as far as just being able to go somewhere where it's like not everybody knows. There's different shame that we all deal with at different times. I dealt with a lot of shame with being married and living with my parents for 2 years. I know that seems like a really weird thing, but this is something that millennials, Gen Zers, anybody on that cusp are dealing with these days, where it's like, okay, you're 22, 23, 24, 25, and you're still living with mom and dad. There's a lot of judgment that's going around about that. There's lots of arguments to be made where, I mean, no offense to anybody that's making those types of judgments. When you moved out, was rent $1,400 a month? Like, like that's kind of, and if you're going to say, yeah, and it's like, okay, were you also paying for, what was it? When I was in college, I had somebody confront me about it. Or when we were married for a year, and I had somebody confront me about it. How are you still living with your parents a year into your marriage? And I was like, well, to rent a neighborhood where I feel like it's safe enough for my wife to be left alone there. We're looking at about $1,100 a month in just rent.
Right.
That's not utilities. And then on top of that, my wife graduated from a private school. And I'm going to school. So our current monthly payment for her student loans and for my tuition, we are paying $1,500 a month right now, in student loan payments. And that's more than people's mortgages.
Yep.
And yet I'm a junior high youth pastor at a church.
You also didn't pay for television when you were up until mid 80s. Your phone bill was a minimum. I mean, and you can say, well, you don't have to pay for television. Look, you're paying for your internet, which you're pretty much expected to have. Like,
yep.
Because a lot of people take work home. They got to be able to answer email. So don't tell me like, well, you don't have to. Internet's not a required. No, to hell with that. You got to have it. A lot of places require a phone bill to show proof of residency. Cell phone bills are expensive, and yes, we all now are pretty. So yeah, there's all kinds of overhead beyond what you had to have in like 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and like car insurance has gotten more expensive. A lot of things have gotten more expensive. So anyway,
and so I mean, like, I'm not trying to vent or anything. I'm just sitting there and saying that there's a lot of shame that people feel, and I can tell you that from my personal experience. If you're like, that doesn't seem like that's. When you're 24 years old, 23 years old, and your whole life revolves around your success as far as, college and stuff, and the people are expecting you to do this, that, there's a certain order into which you're supposed to do things. I got married before I graduated college. I got married and didn't move out right away, so it was 2 years that we lived with my parents. And that was really tough because there was lots of space. Because when you get married in our area, you should not be living with your parents. You should be fully independent at that point. Which I have lots to say about that, but it's not worth saying on air. But it's just... but then going to some place where you're invisible and you get to disclose whatever information that you want about stuff, it's it's nice where it's just like, yeah, nobody knows anything about me or anything about, and I don't feel any shame through here. So I think that there's good elements of doing that. So yeah, any other recommendations for those trying to be in the church after their divorce?
No.
Counseling, pretty much.
Well, get yourself into church, but don't rely on a pastor. I don't care what they tell you at the beginning about coming up. Like, prayer's not enough. Find a counselor. My recommendation is talk to the church to see if they have counselors they can recommend, and that sometimes that's a little dicey because it doesn't mean that their counselors that they're recommending you to are great. But
I'd recommend that for somebody who's like, well, I want to make sure that I get somebody who's, reliable within the church. So it's like, yes, if that's your concern, then go to the pastor and like go. And but here's also the thing is not every counselor is a good one, and not every counselor is right for you. Go and find others, go find recommendations, see who's good in the area. When I found my counselor, I had to we did research on who was good in our area. I went and I discussed with him, and it was just kind of like a trial run where it's like, okay, the first time we had a conversation, how was it going to go? I felt very confident, very safe in that environment. I don't feel like he was trying to push an agenda on me or anything like that. I felt like he was knowledgeable and knew exactly what he was talking about. And Tim knows my counselor, so like...
his counselor's great. Here's just to be clear, here's why it's important to see a counselor and not a pastor.
I could give you 30 reasons.
Give you
I know.
Practical reasons. Pastors are trained to talk and fix problems. Or the personality trait that becomes a pastor is one who thinks he needs to talk and solve people's problems. And a lot of that's going to be biblical based, and it's going to be, that's not what you need when you're coming out of divorce. Yeah. When we're talking about, you need to go think about, and like, you need to think about how did I pick the wrong person? Do I need to figure out? That doesn't happen by going to a counselor and them saying, well, sounds to me like you do this, that, and the other. That's not what happens. Counselors are going to sit there and they're going to let you talk and talk and talk and talk. And that's what most of counseling is you talking and them asking more questions to get more emotions and thoughts out of you so that you start thinking like, oh, yeah. And it might, in a lot of cases, it might be like, oh, yeah.
Well,
damn, I'm just doing what my parents did, and they got divorced, and now I'm doing the same thing. And you know what? It's liberating, because you're like,
And it's also fairly similar to what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, like the psychology elements is. So I went and when I was talking with my counselor and about some of the stuff that I was going through, and just having somebody explain to you, again, those kind of psychological phenomena that exist out there in the world. You are not an isolated incident.
You're not a weirdo.
You're not a weirdo.
You're not broken.
It's not like those things have a name. So you go and you're like, okay, this person, and they explain to you that the relationship that you are having with this person and the way that they are responding to you is because that person is a narcissist. You know, and you're like, and they're like, and this is what narcissism looks like, and this is how this works, and then all of a sudden, like, all the like dots start connecting.
And you're like, I always called those people assholes. It's like,
and you're like,
well, that's one kind, but this is a specific kind.
And they're like, and here's what causes narcissism. So this person probably had this type of upbringing, and blah blah blah. And you sit there and you can connect the dots from there further. You're just like, oh yeah, his dad was kind of like that to him, and like blah 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 blah. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it actually helps you have a lot more patience for other people and like those elements.
And if you're a child of divorce in this instance and you're having a divorce, they will probably sit you through and say, so how did that make you feel when they wanted you to do this X, Y? Well, it made me feel trapped, and I didn't want to feel trapped, and so I wanted to liberate myself from this. But you just remember when we talked about your parents a couple weeks ago, and you were angry at your so and so because they felt trapped in this marriage because they didn't want to do this. Oh.
Yeah, again, it's not you.
You
but learn that it's not isolated incident,
right? But a counselor has a way of doing it to where you don't feel like, oh, I'm a horrible, wretched person, and this is just going some generational thing that's going to approach us. Like, no, now you're aware of it. Now,
and here's how we can.
And
help
here's
you.
how we help you with it. So, don't go relying on the associate pastor or even the head pastor.
No, you should never.
And don't even if you're at a big church and they have a family pastor. No. If they say, go see the family pastor, run as quickly as you can. If they don't say, go see a counselor, here's who we recommend, check those out, find some other recommendations. And if they say, go meet with a pastor, no, you're not going to get help. You're going to get platitudes about what the Bible says and praying. And all that's going to do is add more guilt of you being like, well, apparently I'm not praying enough because none of this is going away.
Right. And so my last question, and the way that we're going to land the plane tonight, and I want just Tim to just kind of reiterate, what is our responses as the church for those people that are divorced? What is it that we are supposed to do as a body of believers for those that are going through divorces, for those that are entering marriages after they've already had a previous divorce? Because again, you talked about those repeat offenders. It was that the term that you used earlier, where they've been through a divorce, and so they're more likely to be going through another divorce. Children, same kind of thing. If you're a child of a divorce, then you're more likely, you're 30 to 60% higher, is what it said you had, which is a broad gap, is what it said on the tweet, but 30 to 60% higher. Or more likely to get in a divorce yourself. So what is your recommendations for how the church should respond to, or for those people?
Number one, if you're an individual and you're getting divorced, whether they're children or not, I don't care what was done. I don't care what was done to you. And if you were the one do everything you can. You are now divorced. You are not attached to this person. You've separated yourself. Now do everything you can to make this not a fight. Now, in some cases, that might be, I'm never having any contact with you.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. I've seen a lot of divorces where it seems, and this is, I think one of the points that was made, I think was again overstated. It was emphatic and overstated. Yes, too many marriages, the fight extends outside the divorce, and we now want to continue to be like, well, you're an asshole, and you do this, that, and the other. Once you're divorced, that should be it. One, I don't know why you're letting that other person own you emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah.
By enraging you. And two, if there are children involved, don't make it worse. Don't at all talk negatively. I don't care how bad the other person is. Don't talk negatively about your ex. Talk positively about them. Your job is not to turn this into team mom or team dad, or team dad and versus team dad number 2, or whatever. No, that is not your job.
Right.
Your divorce is between you two. Do not involve the children. If you involve the children and try to either ingratiate yourselves or make that other person worse, that is evil, sinful behavior. And if you were the one who was getting beaten black and blue every day and you engage in that, I'm sorry. You are now engaging in sinful, hateful behavior that is not Christ-like. You are now separated from that person. Now you could say, end the fighting once you're done. If you're the church, if you're a believer, if you're someone at a church, you're a believer and friends of yours get divorced. I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. Do everything you can to make it clear to both sides. And again, I'm including if someone cheated. make it clear to both sides. I am not choosing sides, and by me not choosing sides doesn't mean I'm choosing Team Dave or Team Susie.
Yeah.
And if she says, well, he cheated on me, my response is yes. And I'm going to put my arms around him, and I'm going to let him know that what he did to you, but I'm not going to run away from him and treat him like he's been the town leper that we're sending out and can no longer be associated with. Because this is where we get into this, again, Old Testament thinking of, well, can't have anything to do with that person anymore.
Right.
And you make it clear to both sides. When I'm around, I don't need to hear bad talk about so and so. So if you are someone who's still really angry, you're still really worked up, you still feel hurt by that other person, and you know that I am in relationship with them, do not around my presence try to pollute what I'm going to think by saying this, that, and the other. It's not helping. It's only making you look bad.
Right.
I know you're going through something. We want to come around you and help you get through the trauma and the pain and suffering that just happened.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to try to work on this ass clown to make sure he doesn't do it again to somebody else.
Yep.
And you know the way that's not going to happen is by everyone just saying like, well, F you, dude. All you're just doing is sending him off in the world to go find somebody else to do it to.
Yeah.
And he might go do it. And you know what? I'm still going to be there and say, God bless you, man. I'm your friend. But why are you such an ass when it comes to women?
Yep.
I know, blah, blah. But being friends with someone doesn't mean I'm team someone.
Yep.
It means I'm friends with you. I might think you're an idiot. I might think you're morally repugnant in some ways. I'm sure people, if they listen to this, I'm sure people find that we're Christians and we swear we're morally repugnant. But, whatever. We've got to stop this thing where we just ostracize people because they're not following it. Again, it's creating boundaries. That's the most succinct way to do it. If you're a pastor of a church, you're a small group leader, you're part of a friend group, don't go about creating a boundary where one or both of you are outside the boundary because you're divorced and you can now no longer be part of this group. If they decide to leave because there's too much hurt, there's too much pain, there's too much shame or perceived shame, that's fine. They can leave that church and you can still be friends. But in terms of that group, that church, don't create a boundary of now you've stepped out and you might bring those the wrath of God cooties within this group of people. So we're going to send you out into the desert with all the other pagans.
Right.
And have the world do with you what they will. No. Die to yourself. Get over your self-righteousness. Get over your anger. It's fine to be angry. You're angry at your friend. You're angry at what he did to you, or you're friends with her first or him first, and you're angry with them. Get over it. Yeah. Your anger doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
You're not the sinner you're not the one who's been wounded here, quite frankly. Their job isn't to apologize to you. I love that. I'm apologizing to you. For what? You didn't cheat on me.
Right.
You cheated on her. Have you apologized to her? Have you apologized to him? Did you apologize to him for being someone who just constantly belittled him in front of everybody every time everyone got together? No. Well, then why are you apologizing to me? You're just going to do it again to the next ass clown that you come across. So remove yourself from the situation and frankly try to mimic what I did when I married my wife. It's not about me. I am the non-chaos agent.
Right.
I'm the one here who's going to eliminate as much chaos and dysfunctional behavior as possible.
Yeah.
Everything's going to roll off my back. It's already been forgotten. Because it's easy for me to forget. I'm not the one who got cheated on or abused.
Yeah.
Or said, I don't really know why we got divorced. Okay, well, that sounds like a really shitty reason, but fine. I'm still going to be your friend.
Yeah.
But no, we want to... Oh, how dare we? Oh, I can't be amongst any of these sinners. It's now I'm gonna have to break this up into 2 episodes. We're at 3:46. There's no way anyone's listening to this whole thing, unless there's just no way. So, all right. I'm sure you don't have any final thoughts.
Nope.
Okay, we thank you very much for listening to this. I think this was a special episode of the Go to Hell podcast. I think this was good to talk about. Colton's been more forthcoming than I have probably on the show, so it was a good opportunity for me to talk about my personal life. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you can the show. And man, I'm running out of these pithy Go to Hell.
If you're a Celtics fan, go to hell.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Like I'm not, like Lakers, whatever, but still Celtics. Look, Celtics fans, you're just closet racists, so you go to hell.